We're going to look at a passage that's a little more difficult, really important though. And so we're going to go to the book of Galatians, chapter 5. I'm going to share my screen again. And this time I'm going to share it so that we can go to Galatians. All right, so let's do that. Let's go to, oh, wait a minute. Got to do it. Yeah, there it is. We'll just go to Galatians 5. First we're looking at is verse 4. You who are trying to be justified by the law have been alienated from Christ. You have fallen away from grace. Now, I can just say that lots and lots of wonderful students, or Christians, students of the Bible, or students in general, they'll look at this verse and they'll say, oh, well, have I fallen away from grace? Have I lost my salvation? So what we want to do, and all we want to do, is understand, what does chapter 5, verse 4 mean? You who are trying to be justified by the law have been alienated from Christ. You've fallen away from grace. What does it mean? I don't want to say, does this say that I can lose my salvation? I don't want to ask that question. I want to ask a better question, which is, what does it say? If I know what it says, then I can see if it answers my question or not. It may not, So the idea is, the most important thing is always, what does the passage actually say? And how do we find out what a passage says? We don't need Greek, we don't need Hebrew, we need context. If you can figure out the context, you can figure out the meaning. Okay, that sounds good. So let's figure out the context. All right, so as I'm looking at this, I start in verse 1. It is for freedom that Christ set us free. Stand firm, then, and do not let yourself be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. Oh, what slavery are we talking about? Slavery to my job? Or slavery at work? That's the same thing, isn't it? Slavery to, a woman might say slavery to my husband. What does that mean? Well, actually, it must be related to what Paul's already been talking about. So if you look at each chapter in Galatians, and we can do that. We can do whatever we want to do here. Chapter 1, Galatians 1. Look at verse 6. I'm astonished that you, Galatians, are so quickly deserting the one who called you to live in the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel, which is really no gospel at all. Wait a minute. That's talking about grace. And it's talking about the fact that they're deserting the one who called them to live in the grace of Christ. That sounds really familiar. That sounds super close to what we just read. In fact, I think what I'll do is I'll open up this in another Bible gateway on Galatians 5. Okay, I'm going to open it up here just to look at it. Because in Galatians 5, it says, you are trying to be justified from the law, have been alienated from Christ, you've fallen away from grace. And in chapter 1, verse 6, I'm astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you to live in the grace of Christ. That sounds like it's saying the same thing. So this whole book is written about the fact they're turning away from living in the grace of Christ. They're turning to a different gospel. Okay. So really, what we're dealing with in chapter 5 is something that we've already been dealing with in chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4. The Galatians, let me read it again, are deserting the one who called them to live in the grace of Christ. So God's called them to live in the grace of Christ. They're turning to a different gospel, which is really no gospel at all. Evidently, some people are throwing them into confusion and trying to pervert the gospel of Christ. So that's what the whole book is about. Some people have come to the Galatians and they've encouraged them to turn away from the gospel and instead not to live by grace. Oh, okay. So I need some more information about that. So now, in order for me to deal with that, I'm going to sneak over here and go to our famous Bible game. No. Our Bob Wetmore, B-O-B, spell my name sometimes. New Testament. Sorry about all these links. I'll get it fixed. Not today. Here we are. Okay, I need to get to, wait a minute. I saw the word Galatians. There it is. I'm going to expand. I have to go back. That's, I don't know why, but that's sort of a thing. All right. I would watch this, and this would tell me a lot about what's going on. And this also tells me something. So I'm going to read this. It's going to tell me news came to Paul in Antioch about what was happening, and that led him to write his first letter, Galatians. The book of Galatians was written to these new Gentile converts who were being incorrectly taught that they must be circumcised to be saved. Paul wanted these early believers to understand that Christ and Christ alone saves us, not circumcision or any other ritual. Who wrote it? Paul. Where does it fit? After the stage of how to deal with Gentile believers, but before the stage of the Council of Jerusalem about salvation by grace. Who were the original readers? Gentile Christians living in the province of Asia. What was the situation that led Paul to write? Jewish Christians were trying to convince Gentile Christians that people can only be righteous before God if they first become Jews through circumcision. But the cross of Christ was the only way to become righteous. Lots of information there, right? Now I'm going to go back and look at this verse again, chapter 5. You who are trying to be justified by the law have been alienated from Christ. Well, we just read that in the Bible timeline, that they were Jewish Christians were trying to convince Gentile Christians that people can only be righteous before God if they first become Jews. That's exactly what's going on in this verse. You who are trying to be justified by the law, made righteous by the law, have been alienated from Christ. You've fallen away from grace. So now I understand this verse is the subject of the whole book. So when I try to answer the questions in our context quiz, which is a little bit different from the other ones, just a little bit different, when I try to answer the questions, I need to realize the whole book is about this. And my timeline tells me that. And if I read every chapter, which you can have to look at each chapter, every chapter does the same thing. The chapters really are telling me that Paul's trying to help them realize that they are free in Christ. Okay, so I hope this will be helpful. By the way, when you answer questions about each chapter, what the subjects are, do this. What's the subject? Well, it's no other gospel. Let's look at chapter 2. What's the subject? Paul's accepted. He opposes Cephas. What's chapter 3? Faith or works of the law and promise, children of God. So this might help you to be able to figure out if you need to do that for any of the questions. Paul's concern for the Galatians, Hagar and Sarah, needed a little bit more than that. That gives you a general idea, okay? So I hope this will make sense to you. It's a really important chapter. It's a really important verse. It's misunderstood by people. It's about grace. It's about falling away from grace, about no longer trusting in Christ alone for your righteousness before God. Okay, God bless.